Yo, what's going on guys, Arekkz here, welcome back to another Division video. It's the weekend, which of course means it is time for another vendor reset video. There wasn't one last weekend because I was in Orlando for Star Wars Celebration, of all things. But I'm back now, so let's turn our attention to the vendors this week. Of course, if you do enjoy this, you do find it helpful, then a like would be super appreciated. Any questions, drop them down below. Also, if you guys are a console player and you missed yesterday's video, then I put together an in-depth walkthrough of the new loadout system that is currently live in the 1.6.1 PTS. So if you guys don't have access to that and you want to see what loadouts can and cannot do, then I will link that video down below. But let's turn our attention to the special equipment vendor, starting off here. Usual piece of advice I give every single week, don't forget to check the exotic weapons against the ones you do have, because the talents do rotate on a weekly basis. So this week Historian has Brutal and Deadly. I did a review on Historian a while ago. Not necessarily the best weapon, there are definitely better weapons out there to choose from, but if you're in PvE, there's definitely some fun to be had with this weapon. So if you do kind of fancy messing around with something different, then maybe consider picking it up. But the main thing to keep in mind is that if you have any of these weapons already, then compare these versions with what you have, because you might find a better role on the new vendor version. So Centurion this week, Expert and Capable. Cassidy has Self-Preserved and Fierce. Pakan has Skilled and Prepared. And Liberator has Vicious, Fierce and Dominant. So those are your exotics. But turning our attention to the high ends, X45, Expert and Predatory, nothing to write home about there. PP-19, of course, a nice SMG for PvE, has Unforgiving, Responsive and Hurried. Of course, Hurried rolls on all PP-19s. Responsive is a nice talent for SMGs, synergizes very nicely with the way that you play them. Unforgiving does, of course, have value, but there are also better options you could consider. So you're in a situation with this weapon, if you were to take it, you could either roll out Unforgiving for something like Deadly or Brutal, or maybe even something PvE focused like Destructive, or alternatively, you lean more towards that and then you swap out Hurried for something in the free slot, and then no matter what goes there, you have a viable option. So definitely for those of you guys that are more PvE focused, remember PP-19 is a very nice SMG, one of the strongest SMGs for use in that kind of content, but of course if you're leaning more towards PvP, then you'll probably be looking elsewhere. Classic AK-47, Brutal, Dominant and Vicious, and as interesting as the talents are, the weapon model itself isn't that great. I do like my AK-47s, but sadly they're not really that exciting in this game. So Tactical, Super 90 SBS, Swift, Predatory and Trained, Hunty M44 with Fierce, Predatory and Accurate, and Military MK46 with Deadly, Skilled and Brutal. So nothing really exciting in that list. The only thing I would kind of get at a stretch would be the PP-19, but given that they do drop pretty frequently, I would be willing to bet that pretty much all of you guys have got a PP-19 in some way, shape or form. Going over the gear next, just focusing on the high ends. Of course, if you guys have any gear set builds, then check these out independently because your builds will all differ. But for the high end side of things, Operator Mask with Rehabilitated. You also have a Tactical Vest with Reckless on. You have a Tactical Pack with Relentless. You have Spec Ops knee pads with Prosperous, and you also have a Gunslinger holster with Nimble. Don't forget that in the PTS, Nimble has changed. It still, of course, exists as it does right now in 1.6, but in the PTS, they're making a swap, so Nimble is now a heal over time. The current talent, the way it works in the live game, is that you heal 2% of your max health for every 1 meter you run in cover to cover during combat, so of course it has value in Last Stand or other kind of PvP activities. However, they've now changed it so you still get the same value heal, so you still get the 2% for every 1 meter run, but it is applied in a heal over time over a duration of about 4 seconds. So instead of having that heal instantly, it'll then tick up gradually. So it's still useful, it's just not going to be quite as quick, quite as sort of potent as it was before. So keep that in mind. And of course on the gloves front, you have Gunslinger gloves with Savage. So those are your high-end gear choices. Also for the mods, Prototype Stamina mod with 1% critical hit chance, and a Prototype Performance mod with plus 6.5% support station range. As for the special blueprint vendor this week, nothing really worth writing home about, but for those of you guys that do want to see, your weapon blueprints this time around are the SRS-A1 and the Classic FAL. Neither of which are particularly great weapons, neither of which are weapons that people would choose over some of the kind of top tier recommendations right now, so really nothing that exciting at this vendor. As for the advanced weaponry vendor, your choices this week are the M1911 with Expert and Harmful, Burstfire MP5A4 with Ferocious, Adept and Accurate. Don't be fooled by this, the MP5 in itself is a nice weapon, Burstfire one a little bit less so, and this one doesn't have a great roll, so you can completely ignore that one. Military SA-58, Skilled, Focused and Sustained, Custom M870 MCS, Swift, Competent and Unforgiving, Custom M44 with Adept, Swift and Trained, and a Tactical M249 Para with Determined, Talented and Dominant. So again, nothing great in that list. Then jumping over to the DZ-03 vendor, since the safe houses outside the dark zone don't have anything exciting this week, then starting with the weapons, you have Rhino Special, Expert and Toxic, a Police T821, Dominant, Talented and Determined, Military AK-47M with Ferocious, Dominant and Vicious, a Black Market SASG-12S with Ferocious, Swift and Trained, Classic M44 Carbine with Predatory, Destructive and Competent, and finally a Black Market M60E6 with Skilled, Predatory and Sustained. Also, not that great. We haven't been very lucky with weapons this week so far. The lists are not that exciting, but to make sure that you guys don't have to trudge into the dark zone and find this out for yourself, then here is the list of guns. As for the vendor in DZ-06, to show you guys the gear set pieces this week, you have an Alpha Bridge Mask with Exotic Damage Resilience and Increased Kill XP, a Banshee Shadow chest piece with Health, Enemy Armor Damage and Ammo Capacity, D3 FNC Backpack with Crit Hit Damage and Burn Resistance, Tactician's Authority knee pads with health and then of course a bunch of resistances, Deadeye Quick Draw holster with skill haste, and finally a pair of Tactician's Authority gloves with skill haste, marksman rifle damage and health on kill. Then in the West 31st Dark Zone checkpoint, you have a Military Scar H, which are those high damage marksman rifles, the ones that are really good in PvE, some of the highest damage marksman rifles in the game. That of course also goes alongside the SOCOM MK20 SSR and the Police MK17, but this one here has 147% headshot damage. It also has Prepared, which is of course good for this type of weapon given your typical engagement range. You have Unforgiving, which, as I mentioned earlier, not necessarily one of my favourite talents, but you can definitely get some value out of it. So in this situation, you could keep that in there and then roll out Harmful, which, let's be honest, is a wasted talent. But bearing in mind, whatever you roll in this slot will, of course, be free, so you could then have something and not have to worry too much about having to unlock it. So either way, interesting combination there. Definitely not a god roll Scar H, that's for sure. I've seen some really good rolls in the past, and this is sadly not one of those, but at a stretch, it is definitely a decent weapon. As archetypes go, this is one of the stronger options, again, for those of you guys that focus more so on PvE. And then finally, the last thing worth calling out in the West 53rd Street checkpoint is an LVOA-C. Also, definitely not a god roll. This one has 23% enemy armor damage. This one has Swift, Commanding, and Self-Preserve, so it is the complete opposite to a god roll. However, if you go in with an open mind and you were to keep Self-Preserved, because of course there can be some value in that, and you roll out Commanding for something that is definitely a lot more useful, then you'd of course at least have a semi-decent weapon. The LVOA-C as a model is a great weapon to use, so if you guys don't have one at all, then I would always recommend holding on to one, especially if you go in something like Last Stand where things are normalized and whatnot, then you can definitely get some value out of it, even if it's not the best rolled version. Of course, in an ideal situation, we would have a completely different set of talents on this, but for the sake of making you guys aware, there is an LVOA-C that you can buy. Roll out Commanding, Swift is, again, something you don't necessarily need, but it's also not a bad talent, and of course, Self-Preserved could have some value in this situation. So, at a stretch, there is this available. But that, my friends, is honestly all there is this week. It is a pretty dire week this week. Nothing exciting, nothing that I would say you definitely have to pick up. There are a couple of sort of stretch recommendations, but you're going to have to go in with, as I said before, a very open mind. Think about things a little bit more outside the box, but there are a couple of things you could consider grabbing. But if you guys are away this week or you haven't played, then there's nothing that you're going to miss out on. So, that's it for the time being. If you did enjoy this, you did find it helpful, then a like would be super appreciated. Check out yesterday's video if you guys want a better look at loadouts, and take it easy. Catch you next time. Peace out.